I think what's going to be really unfortunate, but also, as I've said, we're trying to find the positives out of this, but there will be a big negative, and I think the big negative will hit next year for a lot of people. I think a lot of businesses will close after March next year when the JobKeeper ends, the debt catches up with everybody, and there will be some form of the thing hitting the fan, if you know what I mean.
Today on Dirty Linen, we are talking to James Broadway. James is a fixture on the Victorian hospitality scene. He is a restaurateur, he's a wine guy, he's a photographer, and he is an owner of Tedesca Osteria, a fixed menu dining experience on the Mornington Peninsula, which he runs with regular collaborator Brigitte Hafner. James has also closed a restaurant during the pandemic, the much-loved Gertrude Street Enoteca. James, how are you doing?
I'm doing great, Dani. Thank you. Thanks for having me on.
It's an absolute pleasure. I know that whenever I eat in your venues, I feel very much cosseted in a hospitality experience. And I know that hospitality is something that you don't just deal out like cards in a poker game, but it's something that you really think about and have strong views on. Could you share a little bit of your hospitality philosophy?
Sure. Look, right from day one when we opened the Enoteca, I guess Brigitte and I had sort of talked about what hospitality meant to us and what we wanted to achieve with it and how we wanted our venues to relate to people. And so we always had this idea that our venues would treat our staff as intelligent beings who would form relationships with customers, and that the hospitality would be natural, not rehearsed or performative. It would be something genuine, warm, connective, and individual for every person that walked in the door. It's a pretty simple philosophy. I think you get it all over the world in great hospitality, but it's just something that you can explore to the nth degree if you really go down the rabbit hole of what is hospitality.
Well, tell us about how that hospitality operated at the two businesses that we've started talking about.
So I think with Tedesca Osteria, it's been really remarkable. We had this idea of a fixed menu restaurant that would have a small team. We felt that there were so many problems with how the hospitality model works in restaurants, where the hours are so long. They're so unsustainable in terms of the amount of people that work in kitchens compared to how much the food on the plate is worth. What we wanted was actually an incredibly simple model where the team would bond almost like a family, that we'd all work the same number of hours, that none of us would be overworked. We'd all be like a committed team working together. And so when people walk in to Tedesca Osteria, they're greeted into a place that is clearly a restaurant, like it's an osteria. You haven't walked into someone's home, but the same level of warmth is there. You can see the chefs standing in the open kitchen. They're cooking with fire in front of a beautifully crafted piece of artwork. You can walk up to it. You can say hello to the chefs. We just respond to everybody as an individual. We don't have a rote. I mean, I'll tell you, one of the things that I have always hated in hospitality is when the first thing a host asks me is whether I'd like sparkling or still water. I always feel like that as an entry point to a hospitality conversation is, are you going to spend X amount of money or not? And that's the sort of thing, that's the sort of thing we've always really tried to steer away from, is that sense that you've come into our space, we've made it in many ways that entry point as simple as possible, and we want you to have the experience that's a shared experience with us, and it's not one where we're trying to sell you things. It's one where we're really welcoming you in. So it's not complicated, but it requires some intelligence because you have to be able to respond empathetically.
Well, I feel like this might be the wrong question, but I know that a lot of people will be wondering it. And it's like, how does this really beautiful, warm, human-centered approach to hospitality gel with running a business, which is at the very least breaking even, simply so that you can keep dispensing this beautiful version of hospitality?
Well, I'm glad you asked, Dani, because we've got two great examples of the Enoteca and the Osteria. And, the Enoteca was, on so many levels, such a beautiful place. We've got 17 years of extraordinary memories, customers that came to us for the whole of that 17 years, travellers from overseas who came in on their own, would sit at the bar with a book and end up having dinner with the staff. And it's just one of those amazing stories of a place that was all about hospitality but maybe didn't have a great business plan. And over time, 17 years is enough time for enough things to change that it had become a very difficult place to sustain. Rents go up every year, wages go up every year, all the operating costs go up every year, but what you make doesn't necessarily go up that much every year. So, the Enoteca is a classic example of a business that was not COVID-proof. It was already marginal, and really when COVID came, it was inevitable that given we lost 90% of our team because they were visa workers, that we would have been closed till now. There's been no point where the Enoteca had anything it could do, that we had to sit down and accept that model was over for us and that it was time to let it go. But on the other hand, it's really exciting that I feel like Brigitte and I, after 20 years of talking about it, we actually did open a restaurant with what I think is a great business model. And it's a model that when we opened it in January this year, and, I really feel so much for Brigitte having created this dream of hers, this restaurant that she'd always wanted to cook in, and then it was open for less than 3 months before it got closed again. And, but overcoming it, we'll talk about that later, but it's actually been such a positive year. But the thing was, we opened a model that ticked all the issues that we understood existed. Like this tiny team, we have 7 people on the team. The overheads are really relatively low, but the product's really beautiful. So the balance between what we can charge for people to come and enjoy our hospitality and the size of the team is far more balanced. It's much more sustainable. Because we're only cooking one menu every day, and we know how many bookings we've got because you can only come by booking. We already know how much food to prepare. There's basically no wastage. So one of our big things is, a zero waste restaurant. That's one of the things we're working towards. But all these elements sort of add up to a restaurant that I think will reopen exactly as it was closed. There's almost nothing Brigitte and Tedesca need to change to reopen post-COVID. And I think that's just testament to the fact we talked about it for 20 years before we actually did it. Yeah.
Well, you didn't know that there was going to be a pandemic. So how did you create a COVID-proof restaurant?
Because I think COVID proofing is not dissimilar to fixing a lot of the problems that hospitality was already facing. I think we all know in the hospitality industry that a lot of hospitality is chronically unsustainable. We've got a few great successful operators in Melbourne, some really amazing people at the big end, and we've got some really marvellous small restaurants that have worked out their models, but I think there's a lot in between that are borderline, just like the Enoteca was. And I think what's going to be really unfortunate, but also, as I've said, we're trying to find the positives out of this, but there will be a big negative, and I think the big negative will hit next year for a lot of people. I think a lot of businesses will close after March next year when the JobKeeper ends, the debt catches up with everybody, and there will be some form of the thing hitting the fan, if you know what I mean.
I think you're right. I think everybody feels that is a cliff, and that there's going to be a lot of fallout, a lot of people tumbling off. And I guess it's really hard to know how much business Victorian restaurants will be able to catch up before then. We know that we're going to go through a summer with restrictions. We don't exactly know what they're going to be. So Tedesca was able to open for a short period in winter. Tell me what that was like, and whether you felt that, I mean, were there things that you changed or had to change because of restrictions, and how did that strike the business?
Well, the way the whole year rolled. So we opened in the first week of January. We were closed on the 20th of March. I think there were 2 weeks where we didn't do anything at all. We got together and we talked. We tried to work out a plan, and so Brigitte and I decided that at that point in time, I think we were looking at 2 to 3 months of closure. There wasn't an exact date. And so we decided that all we really needed to do was to create enough money to keep our team, fed and watered and homed. So we had a number of visa workers and a few Australians. So luckily some could get JobKeeper. And our goal was to make enough money that basically everyone got their wage. And we put the business itself on hold. So we said, we'll do enough food production. We developed the model of the boxes for the weekend, and that was really successful. We kept the team together, which was our goal, and we got through to the next stage, which was the slight loosening when people could come back into the restaurant. So we switched then into a bake shop. So, everyone knows Brigitte's baking is pretty legendary, so that was easy. We told everyone, next Saturday we're stopping the boxes, but we're turning into a bake shop. And so that was a nice intermediate step where all the people that had been, basically everyone who had a booking that had been cancelled during the lockdown, came to the bake shop. They were so excited to see everybody. It was like a party. We had a queue out to the road, which was kind of hilarious, but maybe not great, because I think some people just came to support us but ended up queuing for an hour and a half. But it was amazing. So we got through the next 4 weeks. We got through the next 4 weeks being a bake shop, and that sort of got us ready to, take a week off. We all had a week's holiday to breathe, to reset ourselves, come back knowing that we would open the door and we would be offering hospitality again, which, that's sort of resetting yourself to greet people and to take care of them. Takes a little bit of stepping back and rethinking how you want everyone's experience in your restaurant to be as amazing as it can be. So that week was great. We all talked, we all had a break, and then we reopened, and we had the best weekend of our whole existence. Everyone was so excited to come back into the restaurant that everyone who came had an amazing time. Even though we were limited, I think we were limited to 15 less guests than our maximum. The restaurant actually functioned just as well, and it was possibly because people got even better service with less people in the restaurant. I don't know exactly what it was, whether it was just people were feeling expansive because they'd been locked up for 2 months and were excited to get out, but whatever it was a great weekend. It was amazing. And then, of course, we were shut before we got to the next weekend. So we've been back on it. We've been back on our lockdown boxes ever since then. But they've had their upsides too.
I tell you what, I feel so lucky that I've been able to come to the restaurant, because I must have been there in the first month that you opened, and it's such a memorable meal.
I reckon you were there in the first 2 weeks.
Really, it was.
I think we were still full of smoke when you were there.
There was a definite souvenir aroma embedded in items of clothing that I was able to take home with me. So, have you sorted that out subsequently? Did you?
Yeah, we did. It was, it was sort of hilarious but bad. We had this amazing wood-fired oven system with the open grill, but for the first 2 weeks there was a smoke direction issue, and a few people did go home with smoky jumpers, but it's all good now.
It was honestly, it didn't detract at all from the experience. It was so beautiful, and as you say, you walk in, you're in the midst of it already. And Brigitte was over at the impressive bench with a pasta machine rolling, and there was just such an instant feeling of hearth and home and welcome, and that I was able to be as much part of the experience as I wanted to be. Well, probably, probably if I'd started to pick up a knife and chop something, perhaps I wasn't invited that deep into the experience. But it definitely felt so warm, and the food was so beautiful. And I think that sense of the restaurant where pretty much everything comes in the morning and it's eaten in the afternoon. It was so apparent. Such every item of produce felt so honoured, and that it was an honour to then eat it. So yeah, I feel very lucky to have had that experience. And hopefully it won't be too long before I have it again. Um, which I suppose brings me to the whole concept of reopening and how much pressure you feel upon that. It's certainly a conversation in Melbourne at the moment. What are we allowed to do when? What's summer going to look like? How do you feel about that conversation?
Look, we as we did with the first reopening, we didn't try and reopen on the first possible date. We waited to see how it kind of panned out, and we're going to do the same this time. I think we've got a date of about 3 weeks from now, and there's some possibility of some form of reopening. And then we've got the November date. And so initially, the stick we'd put in the sand was actually the 26th of November, which was the first date we felt we could commit to. So we've kind of opened the restaurant for bookings similar to what we did in May. Reduced numbers, maybe 2 tables outside, up to 20 inside, keep it simple. And that'll be fine, if we can do that. And I'm feeling there's a possibility that might move 3 or 4 weeks early. And so, the conversation with the team at the moment, of course, is, we're doing these boxes, but it's time for us all to start to rethink what it will be to open the restaurant again. And what's been amazing about this year is what COVID did was create time that you wouldn't have ever had otherwise. When you're in hospitality, there's a tendency to pedal pretty hard and not necessarily have a lot of philosophical time or planning time and thinking time. And I think, if you were lucky enough, as we were, to create enough income to sustain everybody, then the year has actually given us other time, which we wouldn't have had. And, some of the exciting things, the one thing we weren't going to do was to attempt to grow our own vegetables because, on the peninsula we had some amazing small-scale suppliers, biodynamic growers, but COVID actually changed a lot of this supply availability. It changed our relationships with people who stopped wholesaling through Melbourne, and just a lot of things changed, Dani. It was amazing just how many different facets of the hospitality industry are changing because of COVID. And so we've really spent a lot of time resetting our relationships. And then this big thing was the decision, we're actually going to, grow our own market garden because we couldn't guarantee going forward the supply of the quality of stuff we'd had previously. And so we had to sort of take control of that situation ourselves. And one of our big projects is this market garden that you'll see next to the restaurant next time you come down. And we're working on the vineyard that's going to be out the front. We're planning to get together with Roger and Sharon from the fermentery and begin a whole kind of fermenting program so that we can manage our market garden into a sort of year-round sustainable supply. We've got a big plan coming up, to work we're working directly with our suppliers instead of through wholesalers more and more, which was always Brigitta's and my goal, but it's a much bigger job when you do that. There's a lot more work when you go direct with everything. But, one of our things is, to get a whole pig from Katie Brown and go through the whole process of pickling, curing and smoking. And so, we're building a smokehouse. There's just so many things we're doing that we probably wouldn't have done this year. And so it's sort of, I feel a little bit guilty in some ways that we're having a reasonably good time of it. But it's also amazing because without COVID, we'd just have all been pedaling all year.
So interesting. What are some of the other changes that you've seen come out of COVID?
Well, there's been a real I wouldn't say a splintering. You can really see different aspects of the hospitality industry in the social media conversations that are happening around it, and the approaches people have taken to dealing with the situation, and the mental headspace, and the the ability to pivot. I mean, I've been amazed by this industry on the level of their creativity, and the fact that how many industries do you reckon you could basically say you're closed as of today, and so many people manage to reinvent themselves within 2 weeks and create a whole new offering out of nothing and build a new business. I mean, it's actually extraordinary. I've watched so many amazing people and been inspired by the creativity. It's been fabulous. And also, I think there's been a flip side to that, which is there's been a lot of anger in the industry, and I think that, I don't know how we deal with all that anger. I mean, I think there's people out there bleeding massive amounts of money and feeling enormous pain, and I don't know how that will heal in the near future. It's going to be a challenging time, and I mean, as I said to you, I do think it's a time to think about hospitality in itself. What is it that we're all doing? Why are we doing it? Who are we offering it to? And what is the role of us as hospitality people in the bigger conversations about rebuilding after COVID?
Well, tell me more about that. Why are you doing hospitality?
Why am I doing it? I fell into it like a lot of people do, but I fell in as a wine person. Now, wine people tend to, it's a real cultural thing. Wine. It's a tool of travel, geography, conversation, culture. It's a great entry point to hospitality, but it does tend to put you in more of a thinking role as opposed to it's not like someone that starts importing wine has worked their butts off in kitchens to get to where they are. It's a bit more dilettantish, if you like. So it gives you the ability to look at the hospitality. It gives you that ability to look at it from outside, to think about it rather than just be trapped in it, and to look at it as a bigger picture. So I think, from my experience, wine people have always had a good overview of hospitality and a real appreciation of hospitality. And I'm sort of even seeing, the next level after that, where hospitality as a concept should really be pervading a lot of other areas that restaurant people and William Inglis and all of us as a community should. I think we should be talking about COVID failures, that hospitality should be playing a bigger part in the rethinking of. And, you could start with aged care as the biggest single failure in Australia right now. And if aged care isn't some form of hospitality, I really don't know what it is.
That is such a powerful idea. So tell me more about what you're thinking.
Well, I couldn't help it. I've always been an overthinker. I studied architecture and went down the rabbit hole of architectural theory, and it always comes back and bites me. I start overthinking everything. But I really just started to see the hospitality failures at every level of Australian politics. And I was like, why aren't we part of this conversation? You can begin with the refugee situation and how we treat those visitors to our shores. You can look at the visa worker situation and how we didn't provide JobKeeper and how there was no certainty for them. I think you and I spoke on day 2 of the lockdown, and we were both like, my God, what are we doing with the people that are actually 90% of the workers in so many of our hospitality businesses? We're just blowing them off. We're not offering them hospitality. And then you sort of go further down the line, and I did a Facebook post where I pointed out, because I could see all this anger on Facebook about the hospitality lockdown, and I was just looking for the positives coming out of COVID. And one of the most obvious ones was that Victoria had housed 7,000 homeless people. There's no homeless people on the streets at the moment. They've been housed, and that there will obviously be enormous pressure on government to keep them housed. And I think we need to be part of pressuring. That is another form of hospitality. Homelessness. We should be part of their conversation. We should be making sure that those people are okay. And I think COVID is going to help solve homelessness in Victoria. I don't know what happened in other states, but I thought it was incredible. We took everyone off the streets and housed them until April next year. And that got the most feedback of any post I've ever put on Facebook. So many people were excited to hear that in the midst of the lockdown. And so it just sort of, it just went on and on for me. Like, where does our hospitality begin? What is the difference between the idea of hospitality and something that calls itself an industry? So we've got these two things. We've got the work of making restaurants work, but we've also got this idea of hospitality that we all participate in, that we're all part of this conversation of. And that's, I'm excited to be part of getting that conversation onto that slightly bigger platform where we care what hospitality as a state, as a country, and as a restaurant we're offering.
Well, I love how expansive that idea is, and how big the picture becomes. As I suppose, there's a distinction you could make between the hospitality industry, which is dispensing food and drink and, fitting out a place for that to happen. And then there's this idea of hospitality as real empathy and an honouring of the person. And I think that's where it becomes really big and really powerful. And I mean, can you imagine if there was a bit more empathy and a bit more honouring of the person in our politics? And, we're speaking not long after the first US presidential debate, and even to put the word presidential in there seems much too I don't know, respectful for the rabble that has made me and it just made me feel so disappointed, and made me wonder how low we need to put our expectations about a level of public discourse and what we can expect from people who aim to quote unquote lead. And look, that's just one instance. You could point to failures of leadership in all kinds of arenas, but it is that tone, and it is I think, this kind of hospitality that you're talking about. And it's what you said right at the start of this conversation, where it's about respecting your staff as intelligent beings who are going to have conversations and thoughts of their own. It is a basic respect that you feel will be returned because of the honour and energy that you're putting into the interaction, isn't it?
Well, I think that sums it up. And it's interesting you talk about the so-called presidential debate. It'll be interesting next week, I think, if you're going to watch one, ignore the Trump one, but watch the Kamala Harris one. I'm interested to see how she speaks. I think that's probably the best hope America's got right now. Is the vice president, to be honest. I'm looking forward to that debate.
Mm. Yeah. What else are you looking forward to, James?
Well, I am looking forward to opening, but I'm also looking forward to sort of pushing these conversations along a little bit. As you know, I was reluctant to come on because I kind of hate public speaking, and this isn't really public speaking, but it was also a great opportunity, because I do think that people we need to gather some great voices together and be more vocal. One thing I've noticed during lockdown is that all the voices are given to a small sort of business-oriented minority, which is great on that side of things, but the mainstream media don't amplify all these other amazing people. You've got the Providence up in Beechworth, you've got Chase out at OMI, you've got all these people who are actually doing and creating and having this conversation on these great deeper levels. And, in the end, I came on because you have obviously spoken to so many of these amazing people, and it's a real great thing to be part of this. I think what you're doing is bringing all these amazing voices together. So, I was honoured to be part of it.
Mate, I had to bloody twist your arm, though. You didn't. If that's what it's like to honour you. But anyway,
I found this amazing article. I mean, one of our close friends at Tedesca is Claire Wright. Now, I'm sure you know who Claire Wright is. If anyone doesn't, she's amazing intellect, a well-known historian and author, and sometimes guest on things like Q&A. She's a great speaker. Her partner was the person that built the beautiful craft pieces inside Tedesca restaurant. But she's just written an article for Meanjin about the lockdown, and it really does, I read it literally 2 days ago, and it was saying all the same things I was trying to connect hospitality to in her way as a historian. And I thought, there's so many voices that need to be heard around refugees, visa workers, homelessness, and then, all the way down to, Black Lives Matter. And, as a hospitality person, this is getting, I'm really looping this a little bit, but I grew up in Castlemaine. I went to university in Melbourne. I don't know how many times I've been on the Castlemaine train after a few drinks with mates, or even having a joint on the train with the window open. None of us ever got arrested. None of us ever got put in jail. And I'm just like, it's another failure of hospitality. Hospitality needs to pervade all these conversations. And I think, I guess that's where I'm excited to try and say a few things here and there.
And just to elucidate for people who don't perhaps know what I think you're alluding to. So Tanya Day, an Indigenous woman who was taken off that train. She'd been drinking. She was taken to a police station and she died in custody. So I guess you're saying that there are inequalities, and you don't always know how privileged you are just to make your way through the world. And yeah, hospitality is not extended to each of us equally, and that is not a good thing. James, it's been a pleasure to speak to you. There are big thoughts contained in this conversation, and I'm really glad that you drew them out for us. I think there are so many more conversations to be had around hospitality and the role that it can play, not only for the people that work within it and the people that love to go to restaurants, but also for the wider conversations that we need to have in society. So thank you for bringing that to the table today, and I look forward to being able to drink some wine and eat some food in your proximity before too long. But thanks so much.
Can't wait to have you back down at Tedesca, Dani.
Same. All right, you take care.
And congratulations on all the amazing work you've been doing during the lockdown.
Thank you. This is Dirty Linen, and I'm Dani Valent. We air the issues that the hospitality industry finds hard to talk about. We spend a week thrashing around each issue, hearing from different people with unique perspectives. We want to hear from you as well. If you have something that needs to be said about a topic, get in touch so we can include your perspective. Contact us at dirtylinen@deepintheweeds.com.au or hit us up on Insta at Dirty Linen Podcast. We can't wait to hear from you.
This is a Deep in the Weeds production.